Space is only going up. It's ramping up, primarily for defense purposes. There will be a war in space. It's highly likely at this stage. And people are preparing for it because America cannot afford to lose a war in space. So whoever wins energy and intelligence in space, I think wins. We're the world's first company to enable superconducting technologies for space and to commercialize them. So you don't have to use rockets anymore. You can just use solar energy. You can throw things around the solar system fully with mass drivers. 80% of the work is to crack how to enable superconducting electromagnets for space, how to operate them, how to energize them, how to discharge them. So we've done all of this for SuperTorque.
You decided to move to LA and work from there. Why?
The moon currently belongs to nobody, but I think very soon it will belong to somebody.
Just go and do it and see what happens.
Ideas are worth like jack shit, absolute jack shit. Like if you can't execute, there's nothing.
Just take that initiative to actually take whatever crazy ideas that they might have and just try to see what comes of it.
Don't be afraid of ambition. Chase it, love it, wrap your arms around it and say it out loud.
New Zealanders don't know any better. They will just get up and give it a shot. That's why we were first to get to the top of Mount Everest.
Go to dream that ultimate dream. Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And it's all achievable.
All right. Max, thank you for joining us. Where are you calling in from? Looks very sunny.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you again. I'm calling from Los Angeles.
Terrific. Terrific. Right. Because you moved there with the company, right? Tell us what's been happening since the last time we talked.
Yeah, I've been here since January. Zenno is still based in New Zealand as a company, and all engineers are still there. But we're looking at establishing a presence here in Los Angeles by the end of the year.
Cool. That's amazing. How are you finding LA? Because I know there's quite a lot of defense, aerospace, that whole town, right? Has sort of went a little bit that way, away from entertainment. How are you finding that?
This is like entrepreneurial paradise. If you're in deep tech, if you're in defense and space, Los Angeles in particular, around El Segundo, this is like the epicenter of that scene on Earth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that because there's a lot of like defense primes, or what is kind of what's causing the gravity of the ecosystem?
I think maybe the primes was sort of the original driver, and then then there was SpaceX at Hawthorne, and then there were a lot of other sort of new space companies around that area, like Impulse Space. There's a lot here now. So there's a lot of private space companies here now, and I think that's what's driving like the next wave of early stage companies in space, in aerospace, and defense. There's a lot of great talent here, and VCs as well.
That makes sense. So SpaceX, that's the main one. So speaking of SpaceX, they just had an IPO. You're running a space company. What'd you think? What'd you think, I guess, about what SpaceX is doing, first of all, but also valuation, how they're valued by the market?
I've read somewhere, Mark, that 11,000 SpaceX staff bought into the IPO. That's apparently more than 50% of their employees bought into the IPO.
Wow.
So that's very bullish. I personally am also, I'm in general very bullish on the future, in particular on the future of the space industry. So I can see, I can share the enthusiasm in general.
But more specifically, I guess, since we talked a year ago, I mean, you had some ideas about where things would go, how things would develop. Let's dive into the specifics, right? Like SpaceX is now, putting up a lot of satellites, Starlink. A lot more companies are getting into the space, no pun intended. Where do you think we are in the broader like market cycle for space specifically, both in terms of technology, but also, I guess, the market itself?
Space is only going up. It's ramping up, primarily for defense purposes. Energy, so energy and compute are strongly tied to space, and ultimately energy is what determines, who has more power. And energy is abundant in space. That's why we see SpaceX and other companies pursue, energy use cases in space. And in particular, intelligence is something that, the energy converted to intelligence is what allows a nation or group of people to sort of dominate, and they have even more power. So I think SpaceX is doing the right thing here, leading with on-orbit interference and on-orbit compute, and utilizing all the energy directly, for that use case. And there's also a lot of push, in particular in the United States, for defense in space. So defense use cases in space. So essentially, there will be a war in space, or there may be a war in space. It's highly likely at this stage. These are the attitudes that are prevalent here in the United States, and people are preparing for it because America cannot afford to lose a war in space.
So there's two threats, I guess. One is energy and compute in space, and one is defense use cases. Let's start with the first one. Talking about, Elon wants to put data centers into space. He's that's been part of the S1 and is quite actively talking about it. And I guess Sam Altman a few months ago said that that's like a science fiction vision that's not going to happen in the next decade or two. Where are you on that? How far away are we from having data centers and compute in space?
I'm not an expert on data centers in particular, but when we think from first principles, we understand that energy is abundant in space. It is virtually unlimited. And when we think about, what Zenno is building, we're building an electromagnetic layer of technologies to convert that energy into useful work in space, whether it's spacecraft movement or protection of things in space or assembly, whatnot. So, SpaceX is fundamentally is operating on this, on the same fundamental sort of belief as energy is abundant in space, and the most impactful weapon ultimately is intelligence. So whoever wins energy and intelligence in space, I think wins, or at least de-risks their own sort of nation from potential disaster. I think that's what SpaceX is doing.
Yeah, and do you think this is like, I think they already sent GPUs up, right, to test whether they can kind of live in the environment of space, and there's companies like StarCloud working on this. But do you think it's like 3 to 5 years away, or is this something that has a few more hurdles than people might think?
SpaceX moved very fast. StarCloud had a GPU on orbit, I think either this year, it was this year, maybe end of last year. And they raised a good round on a huge valuation. And SpaceX, I see, have already rolled out the design for the AI-1 satellite, massive spacecraft with massive solar, with a lot of power on those vehicles and huge radiators. So I think they'll move fast.
And you already kind of alluded a bit to it, but what's Zenno's role in that world?
Yeah, we're closely tied to it. It's all about energy and how effectively we use energy to industrialize space, essentially. This is the race. Yeah, and Zenno is building an electromagnetic platform for space. We're the world's first. We are the space superconductor company. We're the world's first company to enable superconduction technologies for space and to commercialize them. And essentially, we're building a layer of enabling technologies that we think are the most effective way to convert the abundant energy of space into useful work in space, so that we don't have to depend on finite resources of Earth.
How exactly does that work, Max?
We're looking at 3 fundamental sort of directions there, Mark. Number 1 is spacecraft mobility, satellite mobility. So we use our magnets to so we can control spacecraft in Earth orbit, so we can make sure that they don't tumble violently and they point the right way. And we also use the same products to then extend it to interactions between satellites. When they come really close to each other, they can interact with the use of magnetic fields. And we call that line of products a super torquer. So that we have flown 2 of them so far, and we've just become, in June this month actually, the world's first company to successfully operate a superconducting product in space. So that's our super torquer. We then have another line of the second pillar there, or the second sort of line of work that we do, is electromagnetic launch systems in space. So it's the idea of accelerating objects, payloads in space with the use of magnets, in particular superconducting magnets. And the third and more distant pillar is radiation protected habitats for a long-term presence in space for humans.
Right. And maybe to showcase that, you recently won 2 big contracts, I believe, right? One with the German government or German agency, and one with Japan. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those as kind of examples of the work you do.
Of course. So we have a contract with Sprint. Some people say it's a German version of DARPA. Don't hold me accountable. If that's not exactly the case, don't hold me accountable to it. But that's what I heard. And it's a great contract. It's for essentially demonstrating that autonomous operations between satellites are feasible with the use of magnetic fields. So this is exactly what super torque enables. And we have a layer of autonomous decision making sort of on board that we combine with our models, to essentially to make sure the spacecraft can cooperate in orbit. That's our contract with Sprint. Another contract we have is with Mitsubishi Electric. They're actually one of our investors. They're on the cap table. It's an aerospace giant from Japan. And that contract is for a simulation of super torque as a piece of hardware, so that they can use it internally when they design missions, essentially to see which mission is best suited for this hardware.
Right. These are long-term contracts, right? So I think last time we spoke a year ago, you said this one line: you get to test your technology every 7 years in space. So that's kind of one of the challenges of building what you build. Do these contracts accelerate these timelines? And yeah, I guess you'll learn a lot from these.
Yeah, so this year we're going to ship two more superconductors to our partners. One of them is already announced. We're shipping it in July, on July 7 or July 1st. That week, essentially first week of July, we're shipping it to an American company called Portal Space Systems. The mission is called Almighty Magnet. Here's why I'm wearing this T-shirt. It's called Almighty Magnet.
Cool.
And it will be, once in space, it will become the world's most powerful magnet ever flown to space. Yeah,
So that's
it's an actuator. It will be launched this year. That's the plan.
And so, okay, so and that will basically, yeah, I guess you'll come back and you will have learned a lot from this mission. So do you think this kind of cycle where you said 7 years, this is kind of accelerating now with, I guess, more money going into the space, governments putting more of these contracts up? Do you think there's going to be more iteration in the space industry?
Yeah, Hendrik, I think America in particular is putting a lot of mass into orbit. And that's ultimately what wins a space race. Yeah, so America has 10x the amount of mass that they're putting into orbit since 2016. For comparison, Russia remained the same. So Russia plateaued, America 10x. And so therefore, the more mass we are going to orbit, it's primarily SpaceX that driving that mass to orbit. But the rest of the industry has opportunity to either ride on the same rockets or just buy a Falcon 9 or Starship. Get to space.
Yeah. And last time you said that like getting to space and rocketry is basically a commoditized solved problem now. And the real challenge is what's happening in space, moving things around, radiation, assembly. That's kind of, I guess that only has become more true in the last 12 months, right? So rocketry is really not a challenge. And I guess we're in New Zealand, as you know, that's where you originated, Zenno from. Rocket Lab is the big rocket company out of New Zealand. How do you think about I don't know if you've seen the market cap recently, but they've become very, very valuable. Do you think they're also going to work more on in-space stuff, or do you think they're just overvalued?
I don't think they are overvalued. I think Peter is Sir Peter Beck was a great executor. Obviously they're building the neutron rocket behind schedule, but I think they're going to get it done. And when they get it done, I'm sure they'll have a lot of great business. And I'm not following them too closely, but they're building a constellation, or at least a flat format spacecraft as well. And I think maybe they will deploy their own constellation. Ultimately, in space, a few things make money in space, and constellations of communication satellites is one of them. Is one of the things that make money, like Starlink or Starshield. Yeah, so I think it wouldn't be surprising if Rocket Lab came out with something similar, but I don't think they've announced anything, as far as I know.
Is that, you think the most, is that kind of what you believe to be currently the most lucrative way to make money in space, is to deploy constellations of satellites that provide internet or any kind of satellites?
Yeah, Starlink makes, I'm speaking sort of from memory, from scrolling the news feed, something in the order of like 5 to 6 billion for SpaceX per year. Yeah, so maybe wrong, but it's somewhere near that number. And before that, companies that made money in space were like geostationary communication satellites that made money in space. So it's mostly comms at this stage.
Interesting. How do you think that progression goes? So what is the next kind of phases? Like if you think about the internet, evolution of the internet, right? Initially the companies that got really valuable were the companies that laid the fiber, the infrastructure companies, right? And then it was like these foundational sort of like companies like Yahoo, like Google, like Microsoft, that started building parts of the internet as we know it today. And then as the internet kind of evolved, there's different phases to it. Different enabling technologies that had different types of unicorns and companies come out of them. How do you think about space if you were to sort of mirror that? Do you see different stages where different types of companies are valuable and there's kind of value to be accrued at different stages in the life cycle?
Yeah, Mark, I think the space industry is now established as an industry. So if I were to compare it to there was a first wave of internet companies that then most of them collapsed. And then the second wave came in, and like that's when Facebook came along and so on. And then they stayed for good. And I think the space industry had the same first wave. There were a lot of companies that went public. Most of them collapsed. And now we're seeing a second wave of companies being funded in the space industry. And I think this is going to stay. And it's going to expand beyond obviously the traditional communications obviously Starlink pioneered the new way of communicating from low Earth orbit. We're going to have, I think there's a big opportunity in defense and space, because Russia and China are, quite active in space, and they're launching their own constellations, and I'm sure they're launching their own like offensive and defensive technologies into space. So in particular in America, there is a room for a defense prime. in space. And I think data centers in space will work as well as a business.
Tell me more about defense. And I guess, back in whenever the 70s or 80s, Ronald Reagan had this idea of Star Wars, right? Using satellites and lasers to intercept ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? Is that sort of how you envision it? Or do you envision it like literally like satellites fighting each other? And if so, what does that look like? Does it look like the Star Wars that we see in the movies, or is it something different? How exactly do you see that evolving? What does that look like?
I think being able to intercept a missile with a laser is like a dream from space. Because here's what you want to do. You want to be able to intercept rockets so that the cost per intercept is lower than the rocket, so that you cannot be overwhelmed financially as a nation, which is what is currently happening in like Russia-Ukraine war. So you want your cost per intercept to be very low, and laser would, if you think from first principles, probably is a good solution. But then there are problems. I'm not an expert in laser, but there are problems there with the fact that it has to be super massive. The vehicle has to be super massive. It's really hard to build a vehicle like this in space. The pointing requirements are insane. You have to point super precisely and you have to track the target that is a few hundred kilometers away from you. The target is rotating, it may be reflective. There are a lot of challenges there, with directed energy weapons. So maybe not lasers for space-based missile interception just yet. But I think KKVs, kinetic kill vehicles, probably is the solution we'll see. And essentially, you shoot an object, you accelerate an object from space towards a missile, and you hit the missile, and it falls apart. So it's a very simple approach, but you want to make sure that solution is affordable. So if you have to like carry rockets to space, you have to carry a lot of fuel, like engines, valves, all that mass, and you carry only like one shot per satellite. Then again, it's becoming very expensive. It may cost you like $25 million to intercept, like, let's say, a $5 million, missile. That's not good. So you want to be able to, you want it to be very affordable.
Max, let's take a step back, right? Like on land, it's like, okay, if you have a war, you want to take over some piece of territory, you want to take over maybe some people. In space, what would be like the first principle kind of causes of a conflict? Are you trying to take over? Somebody's satellite, somebody's data center? What actually would prompt somebody to try to like, or is it that you're trying to disable like a Starlink constellation to prevent, your enemies from having communication? What sort of, how do you see that?
From my understanding, it's the ability to see from space that you want to take out. So currently there are private companies that are, for example, aiding Ukraine in the war with Russia, and they have an ability to see, through the clouds day and night what's happening and where. So therefore, they can act on that intelligence. And I'm sure it's a great deal of trouble, for Russia to have that, capability on the side of Ukraine. Another capability, of course, is communications like Starlink. So I think those two, the comms and ability to see, they're the things you want to take out in the war, first. Yeah. So you need to therefore be able to defend those assets in space somehow.
I see. Now, does the economics actually work in the favor of the offensive capability, right? Because I assume putting up something in the space is very expensive. So putting up a ton of missiles or a ton of offensive capability, if you have redundancy in like a Starlink constellation, for example, is it actually worth your time to put up a ton of offensive capability when at the end of the day, the redundancy will actually not really cause your opponent to lose any communication or visibility?
Yeah, with Starlink, I don't know, Mark. I don't have a good answer for you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that if financially it doesn't make sense, then it's not a threat. But
I mean, you can already see that Starlink plays a role in the Ukraine war, right?
yes,
Where they shut off the access for Russians to use it.
hmm
So there's probably already for if they had the capability to attack that constellation, right?
yeah. And there was an example of a few Russian satellites in orbit approaching a private spacecraft made by ISA, a European company. I'm not sure what happened to it, but they got really close to it. I'm not sure if they're spying on it or trying to take it out, but ISA is not Starlink. It doesn't have like tens of thousands of vehicles in space. So each vehicle is much more valuable, therefore,
Yeah, interesting. And I guess back to this question of what it would actually look like, right? That you're seeing on the ground, as you mentioned, like in Russia, Ukraine, or in Iran, kind of shooting drones. What you get is like you get these very cheap offensive capabilities, right? And it's you have to, it's like you either have to build interceptors or build some kind of new capability like lasers, or use very expensive like Patriot missile systems, right? You're actually very familiar with one of these interceptor companies, right? Thermopile or something.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of the same trajectory that space, offensive capabilities in space will also develop? Is like you'll first kind of like, yeah, well, or how do you see that trajectory developing?
I think what Ukraine demonstrated to the world in general is that the approach of creating, more affordable, higher volume interceptors is very effective, because then you can just like economically drain the opponent. And I think that is a very smart approach for space as well. I think the solution in space needs to be aligned with that logic as well. It needs to be very affordable.
Makes sense. In terms of what you're building, right? How does your products help enable the customers that you're working with? Like, so my understanding is currently, whenever you launch a satellite, a lot of the satellites use fuel, and when that fuel runs out, they can't reposition and they eventually get phased out, right? They become sort of just large chunks of metal that float through space. Not very useful. Is that right? And you're sort of building almost like a perpetual motion machine inside of the satellites that allow them to
No,
continue to operate?
Yeah. Yeah, the machine is very finite. It's not it's not infinite like perpetual motion machine. Simply because hardware has real limits, in space. But essentially, what we're doing, Mark, is we are making systems more reliable. So, we're working with customers that for whom reliability is very important, where in missions where failure is not an option and where it's not a high volume, a solution like Starlink is, for example, which I think presumes a certain failure rate, by design. So this approach works in low Earth orbit for communications, but for other scenarios in other orbits, this approach does not work. And we work with customers that go slightly higher than Starlink. So Starlink is at like 45 to 600 kilometer altitude. We're working with customers that go thousands of kilometers away from Earth, maybe like 8,000 kilometers. In those orbits, first of all, normally you cannot use the technologies you can use in low Earth orbit. Like you cannot stabilize a spacecraft with simple torque rods like you can in low Earth orbit. So they would
Why is
normally
that?
carry the torque rods are too weak to be able to interact with the magnetic field of Earth at that altitude, and they're very limited in that sense. So they people normally carry fuel with them, like a fuel, and they carry thrusters, and then they sort of use thrusters to every now and then reset the position of their satellite. But that's a massive system. It costs quite a bit, and its reliability is not great there. So we create a much more reliable, fully solid state solution that works and just uses solar energy and it positions satellite with respect to Earth. Very soon.
Interesting. What types of satellites? What's the difference between the satellites that are in low Earth orbit versus the ones that are much higher? There are different applications, use cases.
Yeah, different use cases. Ultimately, there are different types of maybe like observation, like maybe observing different things for different customers, on different time frames. So in low Earth orbit, you normally live for a few years, maybe up to 5 years, maybe up to 7 in low Earth orbit. In medium Earth orbit, you want to live there for 10, 15 years. So, and also in the medium Earth orbit, radiation is so much worse than it is in low Earth orbit, and you have to build for this, and you have to build for this, with certainty that it will last at least that long, because as I said, failure is not an option, yeah, and for those customers in those use cases. Yeah.
Right, and then beyond that, is there a step beyond medium Earth orbit?
There is beyond, yes, of course, there's beyond, and there are private companies going beyond, like Astronautics is a private American company. They go all the way to geostationary orbit. Yeah, so businesses are active in MEO and GEO, and of course in LEO. So throughout the whole range of orbits, there are new businesses that are active building various sort of constellations, various use cases.
Interesting. And so is it just that you can observe different things, or what else? What are the other differences, and how can you sort of, I guess, get the most kind of economic benefit from being in different orbits? What is each one sort of like optimized for, I guess?
Well, in geostationary orbit, you can have a satellite that is always seeing half the Earth exactly, and is always above a certain point above the ground. You can therefore see some benefits to it. You can imagine some missions where it would benefit from always having a satellite above that point. Whereas in low Earth orbit, you have missions that are orbiting Earth, let's say every 90 minutes, and they see almost the entirety of Earth, after sort of several orbits, except for the polar regions. Yeah, so it's just slightly different problems that require slightly different solutions, but they end up with like vastly different architectures.
Got it. And does Zenno, I remember before you had the superconducting material that became superconducting at a very, very low temperature, right? And you mentioned you also now have solar power. Do you have your own solar power that you add to the satellites, or do the satellites have come with their own solar power and just use that?
Yeah, for us, we just plug into the regular solar power that a satellite carries. There's no need for anything additional. There's no need for radiators or extra solar panels. And we have a power bank, so to speak, within our box, and we tap into this power bank every now and then as we need, and then we recharge it. Make sure it stays charged, essentially.
Yeah. And if I understand correctly, like the way you explained it to me at least was there's this material, it becomes superconducting, very low temperatures, space has low temperatures. So you sort of borrow some of that cooling ability to supercool your material that allows superconductivity, which allows them to create a magnetic field, which then can apply force to the satellite against with respect to the Earth and Earth's magnetic field.
Yes.
Is that sort of the right summary?
Yeah, that's the right summary of our first product. So the first product is designed to interact with the magnetic field of Earth. We're looking at other products like electromagnetic launch products, for example, or platform. In that instance, there is no need to interact with the field of Earth. In that instance, we create essentially an acceleration tunnel. Some people call it a mass driver from the older literature. You create a number of magnets in series, and you create a magnetic wave that accelerates a payload. For whatever reason, whether you want to send it to the moon or elsewhere.
So I see. Would that be something that you would have on Earth, or would that also be in space?
That would be in space. It will be either in space or on the surface of the moon. Essentially, think of an electromagnetic transportation system in space. So you don't have to use rockets anymore. You can just use solar energy, and you can throw things around the solar system fully with mass drivers.
Interesting. And what has why is that not a thing yet? I guess what are the trade-offs? Was preventing that from being a thing right now?
We're just getting there. So I think one of the mass drivers that makes sense, for commercial use cases, the lunar mass driver. So when NASA and America in general is very active with lunar exploration now. So when we land on the moon, we are going to manufacture things on the moon, and we're going to launch them from the moon into space. So we don't have to use rockets on the moon. And likewise, if we have a mass driver, between Earth and Moon, we can ship things from the moon back to Earth. Let's say we mine something on the moon, like some sort of a precious cargo on the moon that has high cost per kilogram, like measured in the millions of dollars. So we can very affordably ship it back to Earth. We don't have to use complex rockets anymore. So you invest once into like this electromagnetic launch system, and you can use it for tens of years.
But Max, is that? I mean, why don't we already have that here on Earth? Like, why haven't people developed that?
Right, on Earth, the Earth is quite heavy, and it's difficult to escape Earth's gravity with a system like this. It is.
I see.
I believe it's possible. I believe we came close to it, but essentially, here's the catch, Mark. Earth is quite heavy and it has an atmosphere, so you need to accelerate something to over 12 kilometers per second as you let go of it. But then it immediately hits the atmosphere. And it starts, it has to go through a lot of G forces, like tens of thousands of Gs. And then it has to hit the atmosphere, and it starts, heating up the atmosphere, like faces plasma, and it slows down. And it's just not a great thing to do on Earth. I think we can probably overcome this. I'm speculating we can probably overcome this, but for very dumb payloads. Like if we want to launch dumb mass from Earth, not like anything complex, but something really, really simple. We just want to launch refueling tanks, to space from Earth. You could probably do that with a mass driver from Earth. Yeah, but rockets, as I said, last time was a solved problem, as far as at least science of them goes. And we've, as humanity invested a lot of energy into making rockets reliable, and they're very reliable now. And I think we can rely on rockets for escape from Earth for a while now.
Interesting. I see. So a mass driver only works for where you don't have a lot of like forces pulling you back.
Not much mass and no atmosphere. Yeah.
Interesting. So wait, so you guys are working on a mass driver?
We're working in general on a electromagnetic launch paradigm. Yeah. So I think we're still working on a few things. Maybe towards the end of this year, we'll speak publicly about the product that we have in mind.
And are there any other? I mean, like whenever you have like maglev trains, is that the same concept?
It uses magnetism in general, but yeah, sort of. Yeah, similar.
What's the difference?
Comparable. Well, I'm thinking of mostly a superconducting mass driver, in particular, made of superconducting coils. So there's no rail and there's no levitation involved. But I think for general public, it's a similar sort of idea. It's frictionless magnetic acceleration.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Next, maybe a broader question: how do you determine what products to build? This is a fairly relatively small and upcoming and new industry, right? Relatively speaking. Do you go talk to customers, or how do you determine what is the product that you should be building? How do you determine what's the way the product should look?
Mark, it's a mix. The best entrepreneur advice from the best entrepreneurs is to build from the customer end. So, from the user experience backwards, not from technology and then try to find a home for it. That is normally the worst thing to do. So we did a combination of these two things at Zenno. We first thought from first principles, sort of from first principles on behalf of the customer, so to speak, right? Okay, if a customer goes to space, what is going to be limiting them? And that's essentially terrestrial resource and ultimately inability to achieve stability and scale if there's no way to use a space-based energy directly. And then so that was the thesis pre-seed round for Zenno. And then we interacted with customers quite a lot, spoke to them about this particular product that we have currently on the market, Supertorque, whether it would make sense to them or not, and whether they're prepared to pay a price or not, and and why, and so on. We actually even commissioned an independent third party to do analysis for us, in addition to what we were doing at the time, to make sure that we have multiple takes on it, and we're not buying our own bullshit. So that's how we came up with the Supertorque. And Supertorque also happens to be one of the most straightforward use cases of a superconducting platform in space. So it's a lot harder to make an electromagnetic launch system for space than to make a Supertorque. Well, maybe not a lot. In absolute terms, I would say boldly that I would say sort of 80% of the work is 80% of the work is to crack how to enable superconducting electromagnets for space, how to operate them, how to energize them, how to discharge them, how to not quench them or quench them, and so on. So we've done all of this for Supertorque, and now we just need to scale. If you're looking at launch platforms in space, it's about scaling what we know about Supertorque, scaling the amount of energy by a lot, and the mass and size is scaled a lot as well.
And just double clicking on this contract that you have with German DARPA. You're originally a hardware company, right? But is it fair to say, or do I understand this contract correctly, that you're essentially building kind of like a self-driving software for satellites?
Yes, that is correct. It's software for autonomous decision making when satellites are in close proximity to each other, so they can interact with each other towards a pre-agreed goal with the use of magnetic fields.
Right. So you have the software layer, which is the decision-making layer that autonomously decides what to do, and then you have the hardware to kind of execute on actually pointing.
Yeah, it is like a full. It's like an autopilot for satellites, I suppose, using magnets.
And at this point, what's the bigger challenge? Is it the hardware or is it the software part?
At this stage, the hardware was a harder challenge. It was a much harder challenge. Now with the onset of modern AI, the algorithms are a lot more solvable than before. Like people have thought long and hard about these algorithms, and it was really hard to solve before. But now it's solvable.
So the development over the last 12, 24 months on AI, has that accelerated your progress on the algorithm side?
Yes, a lot.
And is that because you can use, let's say, Cloud Code or any of the other tools to work on the algorithm directly?
Yeah, we combine we combine a traditional solution, with traditional mathematical models, with a layer of AI that sits on top of it and sort of decides, in real time what actions to take based on the original model.
And I guess we've been, maybe surprised, or all of us have been a little bit surprised by the speed of the progress on the AI side, right? When these new models come out, we always kind of a little bit blown away, right? How do you see that kind of accelerate over the next 3 years? Do you think we're going to be on this exponential curve from now on, or do we see kind of step changes now, but it's going to flatten out a little bit? And how is this going to affect your work?
That's a tough one for me. I hope we keep growing. I think it's been amazingly impactful for us, for Zenno, for me. It's been very impactful. So I hope we keep growing, and I hope I hope we get as close to AGI as possible, as soon as possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's some people that said we already reached it, right?
No, well, the way I define AGI is that it's a system that is capable of improving itself, meaningfully, and I don't think we have that just yet.
Right. Yeah. So kind of.
But I think I would say we're at the age of AI. That's for sure.
Yeah. And last time you said we talked a little bit about space exploration and putting humans on Mars, which is the declared goal of SpaceX. And I think you said something like, you don't want to put humans on Mars, you don't want to go to Mars yourself, but you want to have intelligence kind of self-replicating in space and
Yes.
doing
Yes.
deep tech exploration.
Yeah. I think it would be miserable to be on Mars. I just enjoy Earth so much. And, we are so optimized for this environment, all of us. So I think we could probably do with living slightly off Earth, a short commute away from Earth, like in low Earth orbit. We could have, habitats for work and mid-duration sort of life. I think Mars is quite far, but I think Mars could be colonized with machines, with self-replicating machines. And I saw a video came out recently. I think Elon is is thinking of Optimus as one of these machines. So, Optimus that they build, apparently he's thinking of it being a self-replicating machine. Could be the case.
So why go to space then if we don't want to go as humans? Like, why do we need to do Mars exploration? Is it mostly scientific? Is it resources? Like, what do you think is going to be the main driver?
Yeah, it's information acquisition and generation of information ultimately. So that's why I'm not too hung up on humans, doing this with our own bodies, but machines doing it and also acquiring information at a much greater rate than humans, and also acquiring data and converting the data into information, fast in orbit, or sorry, not orbit, but in space, and sort of helping us to understand the universe via those conclusions. Yeah.
When you say self-replicating machines, how can you kind of picture that? So you mentioned Optimus. Do you think, it's going to be kind of factories on Mars building Optimus that then again builds rockets that go further? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I saw Optimus only a few days ago. But yeah, maybe it is Optimus. I mean, Optimus is a humanoid robot. So it's like, humanoid robots making humanoid robots. I'm not sure exactly what the solution will be, but I think that's the direction that will end up going in. Self-replicating, self-sustaining machines and intelligence in space that will ultimately conquer the solar system, and that will make the resources of the solar system available for humans. And I think humans will continue to increase our authority over Earth. I think our authority over Earth is still very low. We can't even control the most basic things about the Earth, like climate, for example. We can't even control climate meaningfully. Yeah, we'll continue to increase our authority over Earth and expand our civilization from Earth radially. So that's why I'm more of a proponent of sort of O'Neill version of the future, where we have sort of habitats in Earth orbit where we live, or maybe even on the moon. That's also close. That's like days of a trip rather than months.
Max, I'm curious how your vision of the future and us kind of expanding civilization, living in space, part of the time, or maybe all the time for some of us, fits into where we see demographics trending right now all over the world, which is literally across the board. No matter if it's a rich country or poor country, the birth rate is falling. And, the demographers are projecting that by the end of the century, we'll sort of have close to like half, we have 8 billion people now, it'd be like sort of like 4 to 5 billion people. And for countries like China and India, where that rate is even lower, that'll be even worse, right? How do you think about that? Will there be anyone to even go to space?
Yeah, for sure. My children, my good kids. Yeah, I think we'll likely pick up the rate again. I don't think it's like the doom of humanity. That we're dropping the birth rates. I think we'll pick up the rates and and see the 7-8 billion number once again and go far beyond that.
Interesting. Yeah,
I think it's a temporary dip.
Yeah, bringing it back down to Earth here. Talk more about Zenno, your company. You started as a New Zealand company, and New Zealand obviously has quite a lot of really interesting space and aerospace companies. And then you decided to move to LA and work from there. Why?
Yeah, Los Angeles is I've been very stubborn, Mark, for a very long time that I will never move to America, and Zenno will never have a presence in America. So I was. Yeah, essentially, but America is supercharged. I mean, America is absolutely supercharged. America is known for committing fully, and putting a lot of insane work into a vision that the country wants to achieve. And that's what they've done with space in the last few years. And I think America is the best place for a space company on Earth currently.
Got it. But your customers are in Europe and Japan, right? Your customers are worldwide. What did you see being based in the US that you couldn't do in New Zealand?
There's a lot of great talent here, and there's there's a lot of business here. There's a lot of government spending money on the space industry here. And if you're a foreign company, you're rightly you're rightly not going to participate in what America is building. Yeah, so Europe, I think, is ramping up as well. Japan is also ramping up very significantly. From the government standpoint, they're investing a lot of money into the space industry. But so far, America is ahead of everyone else. And New Zealand, I don't see too much investment in the private space companies in New Zealand.
Interesting. And what is it that when governments are investing, when you're saying governments like Japan, US, Europe, are investing into space, supporting the space industry, what is it that they see that is so important? And I guess why didn't they do that earlier? What is it that they're like chasing? Are they trying to recreate their own Starlink and have an independent, satellite constellation that can protect them and not be hinged, dependent on Elon, or is it just resources? There's a lot of resources and they want to mine the resources. Because I think, there's been, like, to Henrik's previous point, there's been a lot of, and to your point, right? There's been a lot of interest in space for probably over 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what is currently driving the interest?
I think the biggest driver, Mark, is national security. National security. If you don't have your own Starlink, if you don't have your own, constellation to monitor the Earth, you're very vulnerable as a nation. And we see historic partnerships around the world break down. And nations realizing that they require perhaps either new partners or their own capabilities, whatnot. So I think that's the major driver. And then there is a secondary driver, that is primarily America-driven, to the moon. Although other nations are also very interested, also going towards it.
That's also what the crypto bros are trying to do to them.
To the moon, yeah, true. They pioneered that. They got there first.
JFK was one of the early ones, right? Was the pioneer.
Yeah, true. Here's the first crypto bro. The first diamond hands. Yeah, so I think the moon, I'm not sure if moon is national security or whether it's mostly commercial, sort of resource driven, outputs. Maybe the latter for the moon.
I see.
And
I see.
maybe one question on that. The space used to be one of the last areas, and probably still is the last areas where all the nations would collaborate, right? Even during Cold War, in a way, like Russia and the US would have communications around the technology. And I guess going to Mars, for example, is such a huge resource challenge, right? It's almost impossible to do this without like global cooperation, right? And at the same time, you see people putting up their own, satellites, potentially launching their own communications constellations. Where do you hope this is going to go? Do you think there's going to be more kind of global collaboration around these things? Or do you think that, because of the fragmentation that we see right now, space will be fragmented too, and that will kind of hold us back a little bit?
Yeah, I think the age of like global government-to-government cooperation in space is over. I think it's private companies now that are funded partly by the governments, partly by their own financial activities that will push forward from here, including Mars. Relativity Space have announced, I think last week, that they're funding their own private mission to Mars. It's a private company. There you go. So yeah, I think there will be no more collaboration like this.
Max, do you ever think about the broader implications of, like, say, this company that funds its own mission to Mars, gets to Mars? I mean, it's sort of like a repeat of, the colonists in the, a couple 100 years ago, where like you come upon this land, this virgin land, and then you maybe you colonize it for the mother country, but eventually, as we've seen, those things all become their own countries, right? With their own kind of like set of rules and governance. How do you think about that?
The moon currently belongs to nobody, but I think very soon it will belong to somebody. That's what I think about it. So I think ultimately they're like highly valuable assets, and they're going to belong to somebody, or somebody would want them to belong to them. Yeah. Although we still have Antarctica. Sorry, we still have we still have a whole continent on Earth that belongs to nobody. Essentially, it's no man's land that is sort of regulated by international laws. But I'm not sure how long that will last for either.
Well, but that's partially right. This applies to Antarctica and space. It's all very nice and good to say this is governed by international law and belongs to somebody, because you can't really access it, or you can't really live there, right? But once that changes, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, free land with resources, maybe I want to take it, and maybe I don't care about international law, right?
Yeah, truly. Yeah, but we're going to see what's going to happen to the moon. Maybe we'll see it. Maybe we'll see it divided and owned in our lifetimes by nations.
Yeah. How do you, as a New Zealand company, do you find that you have an advantage to winning contracts both in the US and internationally? Because I guess as a US company, there's certain restrictions on what you can do internationally, given that your technology is dual use, right? Did you find that it's easier to be a New Zealand company or no difference?
It is, as far as having contracts, let's say in Europe or Japan, you have to compete with European or Japanese companies there, and same in America. So as far as those three markets go, you are disadvantaged compared to their, domestic companies, of course. But you perhaps maybe have some more advantage when you're competing in Europe, with respect to American companies, because they're normally they have, let's say, ITAR restrictions domestically, so the companies are not in a position to sort of compete for their business and win their business.
Yeah.
But in general, the advantage that New Zealand provides is that it is super easy to start a company in New Zealand. There is capital available in New Zealand. There are great engineers available in New Zealand. There is a culture of building great things in New Zealand on a shoestring budget. These are the things that I think enable companies in New Zealand, including aerospace companies. This is like major great things that New Zealand offers to the world. Of course, if you're in the launch business, if you fly something in air or to space, then it's not the advantage that New Zealand provides for Rocket Lab and Dawn Aerospace, for example. But for a pure in-space player like Zenno is, I don't really see, there's no really advantage where you launch it from, either from New Zealand or from the States or from Europe. If you go into space,
Makes sense. And you touched on this a little bit, right? In a world where geopolitical alliances are fraying, the U.S. is stepping back from the commitments it has with Europe, maybe others. In your opinion, right? What is that something that is useful and helpful for you as a company? And you mentioned you don't think there's going to be a lot more kind of collaboration in space anymore, right? Do you think that, so? I guess first question is that good for you as a company? And second, is that good for the space industry in general? Like for us as humanity moving this industry forward and creating stuff in space, building stuff in space, is it good to have that level of competition?
This lack of collaboration resulted in huge amounts of effort being put into making things work in space, and a huge urgency, and it wasn't there before. So if you ask me, I am those two things are welcome: capital and urgency any day, because that pushes everything forward. So that's why that's one of the reasons I'm in the United States.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, maybe like one sort of last question, like end on, or I don't know, Henrik, if you have anything, but for a lot of folks who build in space, they usually read a lot of sci-fi when they were little, they were younger, to get ideas, right? That those ideas inspired them to build what they're building now. Did you read any? What did you read anything when you were little? Like when you were younger, like did you get inspired? Whether it was Asimov, the Foundation series, others, like and what were those stories that excited you? What do you think? Like, what is your kind of vision for what humanity's future could look like?
Mark, thank you. I'm still catching up on all the space, sci-fi books, but I read a lot of, a lot of adventure books, the exploration of the Pacific and the exploration of the Americas, sort of from that period. So yeah, it still inspires me a lot, exploring something that is unknown and pushing beyond what is known to us, and also pushing beyond the clear, perhaps even the reason for why. You asked me many times, and Hendrik today, exactly why we're doing this. And there are some examples for why we're going to space. Some of them are quite bulletproof logical today already. But ultimately, it's the human nature to just go and explore the unknown and to see what it brings. And there's no place like this on Earth anymore to go to the unknown and see what it brings. The last time we did this on Earth, we discovered America. It was not bad. So it was like we got a whole continent, a great nation came out of it. And this time we're going to space and we're discovering what's out there. And as we go out there, we realize why it is useful. So the process itself, I think, is very valuable. The process itself keeps us, we work hard, we think hard, we collaborate where necessary as we go out, beyond what we know, and good things happen. And ultimately, we understand more of this world. We understand more of the Earth. We understand more of the space and ourselves, which to me it has been one of the biggest drivers for going out to space.
Yeah, no, super exciting. And thanks for this positivity at the end of our chat. We're super excited to see where Zenno goes. Can we just do a very quick rapid fire, a few 3-4 questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Quick answers.
Let's do it, guys. Yeah, please.
Awesome. So, what do you think is the most overrated idea in space right now?
Nothing comes to mind. I wish I had something. I'm normally bold like this. I don't hesitate. I don't know. I mean, NASA admin just said we're going to build we're going to build nuclear reactors in space, and we're going to build antimatter propulsion. So what else can I say? Like, we're doing the craziest things now in
Okay.
space. So I don't think anything is overrated.
Nothing is overrated, if any,
No,
underrated.
it's not. Nothing's underrated. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's imagine Anthropic, OpenAI go public this year. By 2030, which company will be the most valuable one? SpaceX, Anthropic, or OpenAI?
Man, this is not my area of expertise. Elon said that that China will win the AI race on Earth, and that Google will win the AI race in the United States, and that SpaceX will win the AI race in space. So I'm just going to stick with him on, he's the most reputable guy I know on that.
Yeah, that's probably a good analogy. Do you think we're going to see humans on Mars during your lifetime or our lifetime?
Man, how many years left? Like, maybe. I'm going to say yes.
Awesome. And one company that you're excited about that's not yours at the moment.
Man, I'm a simple guy. I'm just gonna pump for SpaceX. I'm excited for SpaceX.
Cool.
They got so much resource and so much experience. So yeah, and I'm right next door to them, so I see a lot of their guys all the time, and it's certainly going to be entertaining. Whatever comes out of it will definitely be entertaining. The scale is huge, the ambition is massive, and they're fully committed.
Yeah, and I think part of Elon's mission is also to entertain.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Great. No, this was awesome. Thanks, Max, for catching up.
Yeah.
And yeah, super excited to see what's going to happen in the next 12 months.
All right. Thank you guys very much for the chat. See you.
Speak soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.